Choose any Luna you desire, the elders told the Alpha King, but his wolf chose the humble servant girl. The great hall of Ashvale Keep had never smelled like anything except power, old candles, fur and iron, the specific kind of quiet that only exists when a room full of very important people are all pretending they are not afraid. Mara had cleaned that hall 47 times. She knew where the draft came from. The cracked stone behind the east tapestry, the one with the hunting scene where the wolves were mid-leap and the deer had already accepted its fate. She knew which flagstone rocked if you stepped on the left side. She knew which candle bracket hung half an inch lower than the others because she had been the one to hang it, on a day when the housekeeper was in a mood and she had been working too fast and she had never been allowed back up the ladder to fix it. She knew the hall the way you know a thing you have never once been invited into. Not as a guest, as the person who knows where the dust hides. She was not invited now either. She was simply carrying tablecloths, a stack of them, folded and pressed, piled so high under her chin she could not see her feet. She had learned to walk by feel in this place. 14 steps from the linen cupboard to the servants' corridor. 7 more to the door. 3 to the left. Don't let the heel catch on the groove in the 3rd flagstone. And she was at the corridor window, the one that looked sideways into the hall, without being visible from inside it. She wasn't supposed to look. She looked. 12 women. They were arranged in a line the way a jeweler arranges rings, each one carefully spaced, each one lit by the candles to its best advantage. They wore the colors of their houses, wolf green and river silver and the deep burgundy of the mountain pack that had come from 3 days' travel north on roads that were still muddy from the autumn rains. They were all of them beautiful in the particular way of women who have been prepared for rooms like this their whole lives. Shoulders back, chins at exactly the correct angle, smiles calibrated to the precise wattage that says, "I want this," without saying I need it. Mara watched them the way you watch a fire from the other side of a window, warm from a distance. Not yours. The elder councilman, old Berthus, who had 3 teeth left and the unshakable confidence of a man who had outlived everyone who ever doubted him, raised his hands for silence. Not that there was noise. The silence just needed to be made official. "Alpha King Kale," Berthus said, in the carrying voice that had been carrying across that hall for 30 years. "The bloodlines are prepared. The houses are present. Choose any Luna you desire." 12 chins lifted by a controlled half-inch. 12 smiles brightened by an equally controlled degree. Mara counted the candles on the far wall. 17. She did that when the thing in front of her was too large to look at directly. It had started with her father's rages, counting the boards in the ceiling while the noise happened below, and had never quite stopped. The Alpha King walked out from behind the council table, and Mara, despite herself, despite 17 candles and good sense and the fact that she was holding 40 pounds of laundered linen, looked at him instead. He was not what she expected a king to look like. She had built him in her head over 3 years of service at the keep, assembled him from pieces overheard in kitchen arguments and stairwell gossip, and the particular way people said his name when they thought no one important was listening. She expected something like a statue, cold and decorative, and designed to impress from a distance. He was not a statue. He was a man who looked exactly like someone who had spent every morning of his adult life preparing to do something difficult. There was tired in his jaw, the specific kind that does not go away with sleep because it comes from the inside, not the outside. There was a straight-backed walk that was not pride but practice, the difference being that pride is something you feel and practice is something you do, whether or not you feel anything at all. He walked the line. Woman 1. From the river pack, hair dark as river water at dusk, eyes that said she had been taught to want this, and had managed, over many years of careful effort, to actually want it. He nodded, moved on. Woman 2. Mountain pack, taller than him by an inch, the kind of tall that says, "I come from people who survive things." She held his gaze 1 beat longer than the others, a small deliberate test, seeing if he flinched. He didn't. Neither did she. He nodded, moved on. His wolf was quiet through all of it. This is the thing about wolves, the animal part of what the packs carry in their blood, the thing that lives below thought, and below language, and far below political sense. You cannot train it to want what is useful. You cannot reason with it over a long winter and bring it around to a sensible conclusion. You cannot stand in front of it with a list of excellent qualities and a solid bloodline and a face full of careful hope and make it interested. It is either awake or it is not, and for Kale it had been not for as long as he could remember. He had made his peace with that. He had made his peace with most things that couldn't be changed. It was, in his experience, the most efficient use of energy he would otherwise waste being furious about them. 12 bloodlines in silk. 12 perfectly arranged reasons. His wolf sat like a stone. He was on woman 7, green-eyed, river pack adjacent, her father controlling the eastern trade routes and therefore the one the elders had spent the most time positioning closest to the center of the line, when Mara dropped the tablecloths. Not all of them, just the top 3, which slid off the pile in the slow and inevitable way of things that were always going to fall, the kind of fall you can see arriving 1 second before it completes, and cannot stop regardless. She lunged for them. Her elbow caught the door frame. The sound she made was not loud at all. It was the sound a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make a sound and have failed, which is its own specific category of noise, smaller than a gasp, larger than held breath, carrying in it all the effort that went into not making it. His wolf sat up. Kale's head turned, not because it was politic, not because the sound was significant. His head turned because the animal inside him, the thing that had been so thoroughly, almost stubbornly uninterested in everything in that room, had gone from stone still to entirely alert in the half-second it took his neck to move. He saw her for exactly 2 seconds. A girl in the corridor, crouched over fallen linens, elbow against the doorframe, one cheek pressed sideways against the cloth pile as she tried to gather everything at once, without dropping more and without making another sound, with the focused, urgent desperation of someone managing a small disaster, using precisely the amount of attention the small disaster deserved and not one drop more. She didn't see him. He turned back to the line. Green-eyed woman 7, Eastern trade routes. Very sensible. His wolf did not sit back down. He finished the line, all 12. He gave each of them the appropriate nod. He returned to the center of the hall and he stood there while the elders waited, and the 12 women waited, and the whole room held its breath in the manner of rooms about to receive information. He said, "I'll need time." Elder Bertha's 3 remaining teeth briefly showed themselves. "My lord, the bloodlines." "I heard you," Kale said. "I'll need time." He left the hall. His wolf was still standing. The head housekeeper was a woman called Dina, who had managed the domestic staff of Ashvale Keep for 22 years. She had survived 4 alphas, 1 siege, and a kitchen fire that had taken out the east wall and required the entire staff to relocate to the lower storage rooms for 3 months. She had managed all of it with the same level expression and the same rapid practical authority and the firm belief that the worst possible response to any crisis was theatrics. She found Mara the next morning before breakfast. She did not explain. She had the look of a woman who had already had the conversation she didn't want to have with someone above her in the chain, and what remained of her patience was being held together by professionalism alone. "Laundry sellers," Dina said. "Effective today." Mara said, "Yes, ma'am." 2 words. The right 2 words. She had learned early that the right 2 words were worth more than the right 20. 20 words gave people room to argue. 2 gave them nothing to hold on to. She gathered her things. It took no time because she had learned to travel light through every room she was assigned. 1 spare dress. 1 pair of work boots older than the keep by the look of them. A comb. A cloth she used for everything. She was at the cellar stairs in 4 minutes. The laundry cellars were underground. Stone floor, always damp regardless of season. 3 long wooden troughs for washing, 2 for rinsing. A drying rack system that ran the length of the ceiling on iron hooks and creaked when the air moved through the ground-level vents. It smelled of lye soap and wet wool, and the specific mineral smell of old stone that has been wet so many times it has given up trying to be dry. 12 degrees cooler than the rest of the keep. Considerably quieter. Mara wrapped her hands in the cloth strips that kept the lye from cracking the skin between her fingers, and she got to work. Sheets first. The guest chamber ones, thread count high enough to make her hands catch on the weave. Then the household linens. Then the staff uniforms in rough weave cotton that washed fast and dried honest and made no pretensions about what they were. She worked. She did not think about the fact that for 2 seconds the night before, through a servant's corridor door, the Alpha King of Ashvale had looked at where she was standing. She wrung out a sheet. She thought about it anyway. This is the specific and ongoing torture of being a person who knows better than to want things. You want them anyway. And then you carry both the wanting and the knowing better at the same time, and neither one of them is light, and they don't get lighter over time. They simply get more practiced at pretending to be something you could put down if you chose to. She wrung the sheet until the water was gone. Then she kept wringing. She had been at Ashvale Keep for 3 years. She had walked in from the borderlands in the middle of January with 2 thin dresses and a wound she had absolutely no plans to explain to anyone. The wound had healed, mostly. The dresses had worn through and been replaced, mostly. She had learned the work fast because the alternative to learning it fast was not having it, and not having the work meant not having the room she slept in, and the room was not large but it had a door that closed and a lock on the inside, and she had not always had that, and she was not going to give it up. She had learned the shape of herself that fit this place. Small, quiet, present enough to do the job, absent enough not to be noticed. Not invisible exactly. You cannot be invisible when you are the person carrying the thing someone needs, but close enough to invisible to pass through a room without leaving a mark on it. She had been very good at it. Being seen, she was now discovering, was its own kind of wound. Not violence, not pain exactly, more like the feeling of a door you had bricked over for very sound reasons suddenly having a draft come through it. A reminder that there had been a door there, that on the other side of it was something, and that you had closed it because you could not afford what was on the other side. She put the sheet on the rack and picked up a pillowcase and thought about 17 candles and how even now, 20 hours later, she could call up the exact count without trying. She focused on the pillowcase. It was very clean. She focused harder. On the 3rd day, he came to the cellar. She heard him before she saw him, not because he was loud, but because the stone corridor that led down to the laundry carried sound in a particular way, and she had already learned it in 3 days, the way she learned every room she was assigned to. One set of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate even. Not a servant's walk. Servants learn to land softly in the common areas, to make themselves audible to the people who need them, and inaudible to the ones who don't. This was the walk of a man who had never been required to calibrate his own volume for another person's comfort. She kept her hands in the trough. She kept her eyes on the linen. The cellar had one entrance. Nowhere to go that wasn't toward him, or into the dark of the drying racks. And she was not going to go into the dark of the drying racks because moving away would tell him something she was not ready for him to know. She wrung out the cloth in her hands, put it on the rack, reached for the next one. "You're not afraid of me," he said. Not a question. The observation of a man who was used to his presence producing a specific response in people and had noticed she was not producing it. She did not say, "I spent the first years of my life being afraid of everything available to be afraid of, and then I ran, and on the road I was afraid of the road, and then I arrived here, and I was afraid of the work, and the housekeeper, and the cold, and a long list of other things in careful order, and I have simply used all of it up. I am running on reserve. There is nothing left in the reserve for you, my lord. You are too late for the fear," she said. "You're blocking the drain, my lord." The water from the trough ran in a shallow channel along the floor, out through a gap under the doorway. He was standing on it. The water was backing up around his boots. A pause. He looked down at his feet. He moved left. The water ran. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "I'm a laundry girl, my lord. I'm not sure I have answers to anything worth asking. How long have you been at the keep?" 3 years. And before, she pushed the next cloth under the water, held it there. The borderlands. He was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of quiet that means thinking rather than nothing. "Your wolf," he said. "Has it ever—" "I don't have a wolf, my lord." The words came out flat and practiced. She had said them enough times they sat comfortable in her mouth, the way a smooth stone sits comfortable in a palm, worn to the shape of the holding, easy to produce, requiring no effort. In the borderlands you said it early, and you said it without feeling, because the people who pressed further after that were looking for a specific kind of weakness, and it was better not to give them the handle. She didn't have a wolf. She had a thing, small, untrained, without a name she had ever been permitted to use, something that moved in her chest sometimes when she wasn't watching for it, a low, interior movement, like the shift of something in water, barely perceptible, easy to dismiss. It had been moving for 3 days now, in a low and persistent and increasingly difficult to ignore way, and the direction it was moving was not coincidental. It was not a wolf. It did not count. He did not argue with her. "All right," he said, as if she had told him something small and verifiable about the weather, and he had noted it. She waited for him to leave. He stayed in the doorway for another moment, and she could not see his face from the angle she was at, could not read anything from the quality of the silence he was making. Then she heard his footsteps go back up the corridor, even, unhurried, giving nothing. She stood over the trough until the sound was gone entirely. Then she sat down on the floor, the damp stone cold through her skirt, and put her wet hands against her face, and stayed like that. Not crying. She wasn't even sure she remembered how. It had been long enough. Just still. The way a person goes still when something has shifted inside them and they need a moment to locate the new shape of the room before they start walking through it again. By the end of the week, the whole keep knew. This is how it works in a place like Ashvale. Knowledge does not spread like a rumor, loose and easy to reshape. It spreads like water finding a crack. Quiet, constant, going everywhere gravity allows. You don't see it spreading. You notice one morning that it has been everywhere for longer than you realized. Mara noticed in small things first. A cup missing from her breakfast tray. Not misplaced, absent on purpose, which has a different quality than absent by accident. The same way silence can be either empty or deliberate. Then her food arrived cold, then late, in that specific order that says someone is making decisions and calling them oversights. Then Lara walked past her in the corridor and looked at the floor. Lara was 16. She had been at the keep 8 months. Mara had spent an entire afternoon teaching her how to press linens flat without scorching the fabric, had been patient about it in the way Mara was rarely patient with anything, because Lara was young and scared in the way of someone who had never done this kind of work and was afraid of doing it wrong in front of people who had the power to send her home. Lara looked at the floor, not past Mara, the way you look past someone who isn't relevant, not through her, the way you look through someone you've simply stopped registering. At the floor, specifically, the deliberate not looking that is its own form of statement. That one stayed with Mara longer than the cold food. She understood the logic, understood it clearly and without particular bitterness, because bitterness was something you borrowed against the future, and she had been in debt enough. The elders were displeased. 3 bloodline families had recalled their daughters from the keep before the week was out, quietly, without formal statement, just luggage through the servants' entrance before noon, which was a communication that required no words to be completely legible. The remaining houses were watching. The staff were watching the remaining houses. And everyone had made a private calculation about which side of a line it was safer to stand on, and in that calculation Mara was on the wrong side. She had spent 3 years becoming invisible. What she was not used to was being the reason other people needed to look away. She wrung out her cloth, reached for the next one. She found him at the window on a Tuesday. She had rehearsed. She was the kind of person who rehearsed things, conversations, exits, the arrangement of a room before entering it, the walk from the door to the center, the exact pitch of even-voiced reasonable that communicated "I have considered this carefully" without communicating "I have been awake for 4 nights, thinking about this specifically." Low bow, even voice, reasonable throughout. The speech was good. She had worked on it. I have no bloodline worth the name. The elders are correct about the practical matter, even if the way they said it was unkind. Any one of the 12 women would serve you better, and serve the pack better, and serve everything that Aluna needs to be better than I can. They have what I don't. The lines, the names, the alliances, the knowledge of how to stand in a room that already has a place for them. I am a laundry girl. I am very good at laundry. I know this keep the way someone knows a place they have spent 3 years maintaining for other people's use, and I know my place in it, and my place is... She had practiced it until the edges were smooth. She knocked on his study door, was waved in, walked to the center of the room. The cloth was in her hands. She had not meant to bring it. She had looked down at some point during the walk from the cellars, somewhere on the second stair landing, and there it was, folded and tucked in both hands. There was nothing to do about it at that point except keep walking. She delivered the speech, most of it, the even-voiced version. He stood at the window with his back to her, looking out over the outer grounds where the autumn trees were doing the thing autumn trees do in the north, going spectacular right before they gave up everything they had. He let her finish. He waited through the end of the speech, and then through a silence longer than comfortable. Any one of them would be the right choice, she said again, because the silence needed something in it. He turned from the window. By my father's bones, he said, quietly and directly, neither was I. She opened her mouth, closed it. The oath. Twice he had used it now. She counted things, and each time in the flat, plain way of a man who is not making a speech, not performing conviction, just saying a thing that is true. His father had been a man of alliances and bloodlines and political sense. The keep had run smoothly under him. The packs had been aligned. Everything had been as it should be, and nothing in all of it, not in 30 years of doing everything correctly, had ever moved his wolf. Cale was not going to be his father. I'm not asking you to want this, he said. I'm asking you to stop telling me what I'm supposed to want. She left. She was in the corridor before she understood that she had gone without the correct bow, without permission, without any piece of the scripted exit she had prepared. Her feet had decided to leave while her head was still processing the last sentence, and her feet were considerably more honest than her head. The cloth was still in both hands. She had held it through the entire thing. The night before the second ceremony, Mara did not sleep. This was not unusual. She had not slept cleanly in a long time, not since the Borderlands, not since before, not ever in the uncomplicated, open-handed way of a person who trusts the room they're sleeping in. Sleep, for her, had always been a negotiation. An hour here, 2 there, a darkness that was mostly just quiet, with occasional interruptions. She sat on her pallet in the dormitory, both roommates sleeping, one silent, one making the small steady sound of someone genuinely at peace, which Mara found abstractly admirable. The room was dark. The cold came up through the stone floor in the particular patient way of underground cold that has all the time in the world. She thought about Lara and the floor. She thought about the 3 elder families and their carts. She thought about Dina's face when she had announced the reassignment. Not cruel, not pleased, just the face of a woman doing the practical thing and not being given the option to do anything else. She thought, I built something here. Small, careful, manageable, mine. And now it's being taken apart. She thought, he said neither was I. She thought about the thing in her chest, the thing without a name, the thing she told people she didn't have. She had grown up in the Borderlands where the packs were loose, and the wolf gift ran sideways through families that had never been formally recognized, where it sometimes turned up in people it had no business being in, small and strange and unverifiable. Nobody had trained her. Nobody had looked at her and said, yes, that is what I think it is. She had simply lived with it, the knowing of things she shouldn't know, the feeling of things she shouldn't feel. The low directional pull she had spent years pretending was something else, or nothing at all. It had been getting louder. She lay down and looked at the ceiling and made a decision, or the decision made itself, the way they do when you have been tired enough for long enough that the arguing part of you has simply used up all its energy. She was going to do her job tomorrow. She was on the serving roster. She was going to carry her tray and move along the outer wall and not make anything smaller or larger than it was, and she was going to let whatever happened happen. She had spent her whole life trying to prevent things. She was done with that particular strategy. She got up before dawn, polished the water glasses for the ceremony because they needed polishing, and she was awake, and she was always thorough. The great hall smelled the same: old candles, fur and iron, anticipation dressed up as protocol. 9 of the original 12 women were back, 3 families having withdrawn, replaced by 3 from secondary bloodlines at the elders' rapid arrangement. New faces with the quality of people who knew they were substitutes and had decided to perform confidence about it anyway, which took a particular kind of will that Mara respected even from the wrong side of it. She came in through the western entrance, tray level, eyes on the tray, the cloth in her apron pocket. She had made herself leave it there, not in her hands. 6 water glasses for the guest tables along the outer wall. She moved, heel off the loose flagstone. 1 table, 2. She heard Berthus raise his hands. She heard the words, "The bloodlines are prepared. Choose any Luna you desire," said in the carrying voice of 30 years of practice. She set a glass on the 3rd table and did not look up. 4th table. The room shifted. Not a sound, not a movement she could locate. The specific change in air pressure that happens when a large number of people fix their attention on the same point at the same moment, a collective leaning in she felt without being able to see it. She looked up. Cale was not at the line. He was standing in the center of the hall, in the open space, and he was looking at her. Not at the line of 9 women arranged behind him. Not at the elder council. Not at the banners or the candles that she had counted 17 times in her head. At her. And the thing in her chest, the small borderland thing, the unnamed thing, the thing she had spent years insisting was nothing, moved, not like a wave breaking, like a door opening, the slow, inevitable giving way of something held closed for a long time, opening not because it was forced, but because the right thing was on the other side of it, and the wood finally knew. His wolf answered it. She felt it the way you feel a sound you are not certain you heard with your ears. In the chest first, then the recognition. Not announcing, not declaring, just present, in the certain way of things that have always been there and have finally, in the presence of the right moment, chosen to stop being quiet about it. The tray was still in her hands. She had not dropped it. Her hands were still. She noticed this in the middle of everything, one small specific detail that was somehow the clearest thing in the room. Her hands had been shaking, low and constant. For so long she had stopped counting it as shaking and started counting it as her default state, the shake of someone who is always ready to move quickly, the shake of someone who is never quite warm enough. They were still now, the tray level in her still hands, 6 untouched glasses, a king in the center of the room that she had cleaned 47 times looking at her like she was something he had been waiting to recognize. She looked back. She let herself be looked at. That was all. For this moment, it was everything. The room had opinions. Rooms always do, when the thing that happens is not the planned thing. The sound that went through the great hall was not a gasp, too controlled, too practiced for that. It was the sound of many people deciding at the same moment what expression to have, which has its own specific audible quality. 3 elder counselors went the color of old plaster. The tall woman from the mountain pack, the one who had held Cale's gaze the longest during the line walk, looked at Mara across the hall, and her face did something honest for exactly 1 second before she corrected it back to composed. Mara saw it. She thought, "I am sorry." She didn't say it, not the moment. Cale crossed toward her, the same pace she had learned to recognize by sound in stone corridors, even, unhurried, without performance. He stopped at a proper distance. He was not the kind of man who made declarations by closing the space and making someone feel the pressure of it. He stopped, and he looked at her, and he said nothing. Elder Berthus said something. Cale did not look at Berthus. Berthus said it again with more words this time. Bloodline, alliance, the stability of the Northern Pact, the honor of the 12 houses. All correct words. All words that were absolutely right and were going to change nothing at all. Cale said, without looking away from her, "By my father's bones, the ceremony is over. The oath. Twice now in as many minutes. She had counted. "My lord," she said quietly, "you don't have to do this." "I know," he said, and there it was. He knew. He had walked the 12 women. He had heard 30 years of elders and bloodlines and political sense. He had priced the cost with complete precision, and he was choosing it anyway, not in ignorance of what it meant, but in full knowledge of it, which was a different thing entirely, and a harder thing, and a rarer one. She had never once been chosen by someone who knew what they were giving up to do it. She stood in the hall with her still hands and her level tray, and she let herself be chosen. 3 bloodlines withdrew before the day was over. She watched from a window on the second-floor landing. Carts in the courtyard. Luggage moving through the servants' entrance in the organized, rapid way that says this was planned. This is a message. Women in traveling clothes. Some closed-faced and deliberate. Some doing their best, and not quite managing the closed face they were aiming for. She watched until the last cart went through the outer gate. Then she went back downstairs and finished the linens, because they didn't wash themselves and she was still the laundry girl until told otherwise, and she needed the work, needed the trough and the stone floor, and the familiar rhythm of something she was certain how to do. Dina found her in the cellar, different doorway expression this time, the expression of a woman who had made a calculation about the next year of her professional life and arrived at an answer she was prepared for. "You'll need different rooms," Dina said. "I'll see to it today." "Thank you," Mara said. "I'd like to finish the linens first." Dina looked at her for a moment. Something in the look that wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite a reassessment, but was both of those things pretending to be professional courtesy. "All right," she said, and left. Mara finished the linens. She was thorough about it. She folded the cloth that had lived in her hands for a week and set it on the rack with the rest. She walked away from it without picking it up again. The chambers they gave her were on the east side, second floor, with a window that looked out past the outer grounds to the horizon, to the borderlands. The dark strip at the edge of the world, not quite cultivated and not quite wild, belonging fully to nothing, existing in the gap between two named things as if namelessness were its own territory, which perhaps it was. She had grown up in that gray. She knew the smell of it in October, and the color of the sky above it in January, and the sound of wind moving through the low scrub in autumn in the way it moved nowhere else. She sat on the window ledge and looked at it. The room was large. Her entire life until 3 years ago would have fit in it with space left for someone else's life. The bed was built for a person who expected to rest in the full, open, trusting way of someone who has never needed to sleep lightly. She sat on it. She got up almost immediately. She walked the perimeter, 14 steps on the long wall, 7 from window to door, 3 more to the wardrobe. She was doing it before she realized, counting, measuring, learning the room through movement the way she had learned every room before it, so she could navigate it without light, so she would know the door in the dark, so she would never be caught without knowing exactly where she was. Old habit. She recognized it and let it finish. She stood in the center of the room, no cloth in her hands. Outside the door, she could hear voices, the shape of them, not the words. 2 or 3 elders going back and forth in the clipped, rapid sentences of men managing something they had not planned for. She heard the word unacceptable twice from the same voice, the second louder and more emphatic than the first. She breathed. She stayed standing in the center, not moving to the corner, not making herself a smaller shape in the available space, not arranging her body into the particular compact form she had learned, the form of someone who takes up as little room as possible, who is easy to overlook, who has practiced disappearing to the point where it required no effort, just standing, in a room she had been given. Still, in the morning there would be things to learn, there would be things to fight, not with her fists, but with her presence, which was going to have to become a different kind of presence than the one she had spent 3 years perfecting. She was going to have to learn to walk through these rooms like someone who lived in them rather than maintained them. She was going to have to learn to hold ground she had never been given permission to hold. There would be resistance. She understood this clearly, without illusion. Packs run on lines and precedent and the deep comfort of things being what they have always been. and she was a disruption to every one of those things, and disruptions do not get forgiven on a schedule you can predict. The cold meals and the averted eyes were the beginning of something, not the end of it. She would need to be prepared for more and for longer, but her hands were still, even now, in a room that was too large for her yet, in a keep full of people who were in the process of deciding whether to accept her, in the middle of the elders arguing in the corridor about what she was and whether she was possible. Her hands were still. The wolf in her, the small borderland thing, the thing she had never been given language for, was quiet in the way of something that has arrived somewhere, not asleep, not watchful, just present in the particular stillness of a thing that no longer needs to be moving. She had not known it was going anywhere. She had not known, until a king turned away from 12 prepared reasons and looked at a servant's corridor door, that she had been going somewhere too. The horizon at the edge of the world was beginning to lighten. Just at the far edge where the borderlands met the sky, the dark was going thin, going gray, going the pale color of early winter morning in the north. Not arriving like a declaration, not arriving like something you were supposed to notice. Just steadily there, the light building from nothing to something in the patient way of things that were going to arrive whether or not anyone was ready for them. She watched it. She stayed at the window. She did not move away from the light. That was the whole of it. That first night. Not comfort, not certainty, not the end of anything. Just standing at a window, with her still hands at her sides, watching the dark turn pale over the land she came from, in the room she had been given, in the life that had chosen her. Everything else was still coming. She was going to let it come. But the morning did not stay simple. She had thought, somewhere in the hours before dawn, in the way you think things when you are tired, and the dark is very dark, and feelings have the run of you, that perhaps the worst was over, that the choosing had happened, that the drama of the selection and the 3 withdrawn families and the cold meals and Lara's eyes on the floor were the shape of what resistance looked like, and now she had to simply live through it. She had not accounted for the elders having a second meeting. She heard about it from the kitchen boy who came to collect the clean linens 2 days after the ceremony, not because he was gossiping at her, but because he was 16 and it had not yet occurred to him that information could be currency or weapon, and so he distributed it freely, the way a person handles something whose value they haven't been taught to see. 3 more families are considering pulling out, he said, stacking the folded sheets with the focused care of someone who has recently been taught that stacking matters. Or that's what Cook says. Cook says it every morning at breakfast and then again at supper. Cook is very unhappy. Mara said, "Thank you, Pip." He left. She went back to the troughs. She was not, technically, in the laundry cellars anymore. Dina had reassigned her to the upper linen room 2 days after the second ceremony, a lateral move that felt like the beginning of something larger that nobody had yet named. But she had gone back to the cellars that morning because the upper linen room had windows that looked into the main courtyard, and the main courtyard had people in it who looked at her in the specific way of people trying to decide how to look at her. She was not ready for that yet in the mornings. She was ready for the stone floor and the soap smell and the particular damp quiet of underground. She had earned this. The right to choose where she put herself while she was figuring out who she was going to be. She worked. She thought. 3 more families. Cook unhappy. The elders meeting. She wrung out a sheet. The thing was, and she had been working around this particular thing for 3 days without quite looking directly at it. She understood the elders. Not their methods, not the cold meals and the floor gazing and the very pointed withdrawal of daughters, but the underlying logic. The pack worked because it had structure. The structure worked because it had lines. Bloodlines, yes, but also lines of expectation, of tradition, of knowing what the Luna was supposed to be and having the Luna be that thing, which was its own kind of stability. She disrupted that. She was not a disruption on purpose, and she was not a disruption out of malice. But she disrupted it nonetheless, and the disruption cost something real, and the elders were not wrong that it cost something. They were wrong about what it cost. They were adding up the price of broken alliances, and political ripple, and the offense to 3 bloodlines, and calling that the total. They were not counting the other side of the ledger. What it costs when the Alpha King spends 30 years choosing the right thing and never once the true thing. What it costs a pack when the person at the top of it is going through the correct motions in a room that his wolf has permanently vacated. She had not always had language for these thoughts. She had learned it in pieces over 3 years of listening in a place where people talked in corridors and through thin walls, and the borderlands had taught her before that to listen for what was under the words rather than what the words were. She put the sheet on the rack. She picked up the next one. She thought about what it would take to make a pack accept her, not tolerate her, not formally recognize her position and quietly resent it, but actually accept her in the way of a thing that becomes part of the structure rather than a disruption to it. It would take time. It would take her being present in rooms she was uncomfortable in and staying present even when the discomfort spiked. It would take doing things she was not yet sure how to do, holding her head at the right angle, speaking when she would have previously gone quiet, not filling the silences with apology. She would have to learn to inhabit her own life rather than manage it for someone else. She was going to be very bad at this for a while. She accepted that. She wrung out the sheet. He came to the upper linen room on the 4th day. Not the cellars this time. She had moved, and he had found her in the new location, which told her something she was not sure yet what to do with, that he tracked where she was, that it was not an accident, that this was a man who made deliberate decisions and then executed them and did not much care whether the execution was convenient for anyone. She was at the pressing table when she heard his footsteps on the stair. Different sound up here, wood rather than stone, each step distinct. She kept her hands on the work. He came in and stood near the door, which was the same thing he had done in the cellar, not taking over the room, not positioning himself in a way that made her feel the size difference. Just being in the space. "You know what everyone is saying," he said. "Yes. Does it frighten you?" She considered this. She pressed the linen flat with the heel of her hand, feeling the heat come up through it. "Some of it," she said. "The pack things. The alliance things. I understand those are real. They are. But I've been frightened of things that were real my whole life," she said, "and it hasn't stopped any of them." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" he said. It was such a simple question that it took her completely off guard. Not what do you think, not what are you prepared to do, not what are your qualifications for this role you have been handed without applying for it. What do you want? As though she were a person who had wants that were worth asking about, which was not how questions had generally been directed at her. She kept her eyes on the linen. "I want to learn the job," she said. "Whatever the job is. I want to be useful in it, not decorative." "That's the only kind of useful I'm interested in," he said. She finally looked up at him. He was not looking at her the way people looked at her in the corridors. The calculating look, the deciding what to make of this look. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the hall. Like she was something known, like the question of what she was had already been answered, and this was just the part where they figured out what to do with the answer. "I don't know how to be this," she said. "I know. I'm going to make mistakes. I expect that. The elders are going to make it difficult. They're going to try," he said, with the mild certainty of a man who has navigated the elders for many years and has a clear understanding of what they can and cannot actually do. "They've been trying things for 30 years. They're very consistent." She almost smiled. She was not quite ready to smile at him yet, but it almost happened. She went back to the linen. He stayed for a little longer, not saying much else, and then he left, and she pressed the sheet flat with the palm of her hand and thought, "This is the thing then. This is what I have to learn. How to be in a room with someone who is asking me what I want. How to answer that without reflexively handing the answer back." She would practice. The first time she walked into the main hall not as a servant, it was a Tuesday morning, same day of the week she had gone to his study with her rehearsed speech, which she supposed was fitting. Dina had given her a dress from the household store, not the Luna's formal wardrobe that was still months away if not longer, but a good wool dress in dark green that had belonged to some previous upper household resident and fit her, if not perfectly, then close enough that standing in it did not feel like wearing a costume. She had stood in front of the small mirror in her chambers for longer than was useful. She did not look different. That was the strange part. She had expected to look different, to look somehow like the person she was being asked to become. She looked like herself. Same face. Same eyes that were better at watching than being watched. Same hands that were steadier than they used to be, and still not quite sure what to do in a room where there was nothing to carry. She had put the dress on and walked out the door. The main hall was not, at this hour, full of ceremony. It was morning. Staff crossing between duties, a handful of guard members coming off the night rotation, an elder's aide carrying papers. None of it was organized for an audience. Nobody gasped, nobody cheered. A few people looked. Some looked away again immediately. Some held the look for a beat too long, which was its own kind of statement. Lara was there, crossing with an armload of fresh table linens for the dining room, looked up, and then directly at the floor, and then, after what appeared to be an internal argument of considerable intensity, conducted in the space of about 3 seconds, looked back up, made eye contact, gave a small nod, looked back at the floor. Mara kept walking. That one, she thought, was going to be all right. That one was already working on it. 16 years old and already figuring out that the person she wanted to be might cost more than the person it was easier to be, and deciding to pay the cost anyway. She knew something about that. She walked to the far end of the main hall and then turned and walked back. No particular reason, just walking through the room, just being in the room without a tray in her hands and without a task that justified her presence. She was the reason for her own presence. She walked back through. On the third crossing, it stopped feeling as strange. Not comfortable, not right yet, but strange in a way that had less edge to it. The way a new shoe stops feeling foreign once the foot has worn the shape into it a little. She was going to have to wear this new shape for a long time before it fit. She could do that. She had been learning new shapes her whole life. She was very good at learning new shapes. She had just never before now been allowed to choose one. Outside her window that night, the borderlands were dark again. She sat on the ledge and looked at them the way she had looked at them every night since being given these chambers. Not with longing, not with grief, but with the specific attention you give a place that made you and that you have left, recognizing it, not going back. She had been made in that gray, by cold and limited resources and the practice of making herself hard to notice. By roads she had walked alone, and rooms she had slept in carefully, and years of understanding that belonging required permission, and she had not been given permission to belong anywhere. She was going to have to unlearn that. Not all of it. Some of it had saved her life. The watchfulness, the attention to exits, the ability to read a room by feel before she was fully in it. She was going to keep those. They were useful, and she had earned them at a price she was not going to debate with herself about. But the not wanting, the preemptive giving up of things before they could be taken, the reaching for her cloth every time something felt too large for her hands. She was going to have to put those down. She had already put the cloth down. It was still on the rack in the cellars where she had left it, and she had not gone back to retrieve it, and she was not going to. It could stay there. It had done its work. It had been what she needed when she needed it. Something to hold, something to wring out, something to carry the feeling when the feeling was too large for her hands to carry directly. She didn't need it anymore. She had still hands. She had a wolf, small and untrained and very much alive, that was learning what it meant to have been found. She had a room that was too big, and a dress that almost fit, and a king who asked her what she wanted, like it was a question with a real answer. She had a 16-year-old girl who had looked at the floor and then decided not to. She had the borderlands at the horizon, always visible, always there, the gray country that had shaped her and that she had left and that she did not need to go back to and did not need to forget. She had this window, this ledge, this cold that came through the glass. She had herself. Steadily, slowly, in the patient way of the northern light coming up at dawn, she was starting to know what that meant. Outside the door, the world was still arguing about her. She let it argue. She stayed at the window. She was not going anywhere.